What's up everyone, and welcome to today's video, which is, I guess, a part 3 installment in my breeding series. And today's topic is negative mutations. Whether you're familiar with negative mutations or not, this should hopefully be a simple guide to understand what negative mutations are in ARC, how to get them, and why you should use them in breeding. If you haven't already seen my beginner's breeding guide and the mutations breeding guide videos, I definitely recommend you should go check those out. I'm going to link them in the description of this video, and I definitely, like I said, recommend that you go watch those first if you are especially new to breeding or you don't really understand how mutation breeding works in ARC, because they explain a lot of key concepts that you need to understand when breeding. So if you do find this guide useful, I would really appreciate if you'd hit the like button and subscribe and even consider hyping the video, because it means a lot, and hopefully this will answer any questions you may have. If not, I'm always happy to answer them in the comment section or in my Discord. So what are negative mutations? Negative mutations are basically when you've bred creatures extensively and the number of mutations in the ancestry hits a limit. It eventually becomes a negative number instead of a positive one. So why are negative mutations a good thing? Negative mutations are a good thing to use in your breeding program because they essentially act as non-mutated or 0 out of 20 mutation dinos. This means that if you're running the mutation line through a male who runs the negative mutation, so you get a negative mutation male and you breed him with 0 out of 20 females, you're going back to base odds for new mutations. And if you're unfamiliar with the odds for mutations, let me kind of break it down here. I've also showed this off in my previous videos, but again, I'll just remind you if you're unfamiliar or you don't remember. The odds of a mutation when both parents are under 20 mutations are 1 mutation 7.31% chance, 2 mutations 0.18%, and 3 mutations 0.0015%. So when you have one parent that goes over 20 out of 20, those odds basically drop in half. So the reason why negative mutations are so good is because it keeps you in the ideal range of the chances of getting new mutations at the highest that it could possibly be. Negative mutations are really good for when you plan on maxing out mutation lines and getting all the way to 254 points into one stat, or you want to make mutating after 20 out of 20 just easier in general. Now, let's talk about how we should breed for negative mutations. For this video, I chose to start with 2 Karchas. They both have 0 mutations. I bred them until I had 1 mutation on a male and 1 mutation on a female. My advice for this specifically is to breed whatever stat you're eventually going to be mutating. I also recommend kind of having this as a side project to your regular mutation line. So if you're breeding for melee mutations on Karchas or Rexes or Gigas or something like that, have those breeding on the side and continuing that line, and that way eventually you can breed it into your line. But that's a whole other thing. I don't want to confuse you too much, but I just recommend kind of having your main breeding line off to the side while you're working on this, because this takes quite a while, and we'll talk about how long it takes in just a moment. But essentially, all you need to know is you need a male with a mutation and you need a female with a mutation. Now, I bred a 1 mutation male and a 1 mutation female together, and so their offspring are going to have 2 mutations, right? Because it shows 1 on the father, 1 on the mother. I breed the 1 mother and 1 father together until I have a male and a female. Those 2 obviously will have 2 mutations on the male, 2 mutations on the female. I then breed a male and a female together, and then their babies are all going to have 4 mutations. I breed a male and a female from that generation together, and then their babies are going to have 8 mutations. So this basically just kind of continues, and you're basically doubling the number of mutations on the babies over and over and over again until you eventually reach the negative mutation goal. So what does this mean? Basically, you're going to keep just taking a male and a female baby from each successive generation, breeding them together. The lines will basically look like this as the number is doubled over and over again. Eventually, you will reach the number 2,147,483,648. That is when the number goes negative. It takes approximately 32 generations if you're starting with a 0 out of 20 in order to achieve this. So how should I breed once I have achieved negative mutations? Once you've reached the negative mutations with your breeding line, I recommend breeding the mutation line through the male, just as you would with regular mutation breeding, and using 0 out of 20 females. The reason for this is, if you're always using a male, the negative mutations will never go positive. There's going to be more on this in the next section, so don't worry, I'll explain what that means. But for now, what you need to know is if you keep it only on the male line, it will be a much easier and simplified process. If you happen to get a female with a mutation, you should breed it back to a 0 out of 20 male. However, it's safest to just stick with the male line and use 0 out of 20 females. Can't I just breed 2 negatives together and keep going? This is a pretty common question people have, and unfortunately the answer is no. If you breed together a male and a female with negative mutations, the baby will turn into a positive number. This is basic math. Negatives turn into positives, and thus making your breeding line ineffective, or basically back to where you started. Now, why can't I use a negative mutation female and a 0 out of 20 male? What ends up happening when you breed a 0 out of 20 male with a negative mutation female is that the negatives and positives will actually flip-flop until eventually you end up being over 20 out of 20 and reducing your mutation odds. At first, this might seem like a feasible alternative, but as you can see, it eventually turns the baby into a positive carrier, and thus making things much more difficult for yourself, which is why I recommend running the negative mutation line through the male and doing your mutations that way, rather than using it through the female side and just going in with a bunch of 0 out of 20 females rather than the negative mutation females. Well, there we go. That is negative mutation breeding. I think I've answered any questions that could possibly come up. This isn't like a huge topic, and there isn't really that much to cover with it, just how to do it and then how to use it. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. And like I said, please hit the like button and consider subscribing if you're new here. It really does mean a lot to me. And this is, like I said, part 3 in my unintended breeding series. I intended to just do a mutations guide, and it's now turned into a 3-part series with a potential for a 4th part, maybe coming soon based on traits, because that has also been much requested by the community. So stay tuned for that. It might be a while before that comes out. But yeah, like I said, if you enjoyed this one, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new here, and let me know if there's anything that I may have missed in the comment section. I would love to hear it. And yeah, hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.